All right, good afternoon. My name is Don Ficken. I'm with the Lights Out Heartland collaboration in the state of Missouri and actually several connecting states. And we're glad to have you today for our second webinar. We've been getting together as a group for some time. Our webinar today is really a fun discovery, I think, by WashU University. It's about a light pollution survey and mitigation implementation for WashU University in St. Louis. We got Cassie. I say Hage, is that correct? Hage, is that correct? Okay,
Yeah.
WashU University in St. Louis. Before we start, I want to go just briefly describe what we are as far as Lights Out Heartland. We are a collaboration of organizations, and this is in Arkansas, Iowa, Kansas. We've actually got a growing number of states. Our goal, very simply, is to get lights turned off or at least reduce the outdoor lighting, particularly during May and September, to help birds migrate safely between their nesting and wintering grounds. We've got a number of partners you can see there on our little logo list. If you're not aware of this, and this is a pretty big deal, birds, 3 to 5 billion birds migrate through the United States and Canada each year. 70% of those are migratory, and most of them migrate at night. And you can see on the left-hand side some of the migration paths. The Mississippi Flyway and the Central Flyway are very big migration areas. And so what happens is the birds have problems with artificial light. They use quite often the stars and the moon for navigation, and the bright lights can actually disorientate them or confuse them. And they're particularly drawn into urban or suburban areas. And unfortunately, they just have a high mortality rate, particularly when there's a low cloud ceiling. And you can imagine that big buildings, tall buildings, are a big deal because obviously they're tall and it's easy to fly in those. But also low rises. There's a very large mortality rate for low rises and residences. And you can just think about all the different lights that are going up in the sky, and it just really causes them to get disoriented. And so today, I'm very happy to have Cassie. You can go ahead and share your screen. Cassie Hage from WashU University in St. Louis. We've got a number of partners, and they've gone through their own little journeys, each one, to figure out how to become a partner of our Lights Out Heartland collaboration. And this is a fun program today. I'm really looking forward to Cassie. And so if you can get started and tell us your story.
All right, thank you. Hi, everyone. As Don mentioned, I'm Cassie Hage with the Office of Sustainability at Washington University in St. Louis. And we've been signatories of the Lights Out program for, I believe, four migratory seasons now. I'm going to talk a little bit about our journey, how we got there, how we navigated this in a pretty decentralized institution where you don't always know who the person who needs to say yes to your projects are, and go through a bit of what we learned and where we are at the moment. So our approach was to first build awareness, and this would be both within the facilities team and building managers across the university, so more like operators. And then we kind of waited to do our broader outreach until after we had the plan more developed, but it was really just in more of the operator and facility side that we were building awareness with, and also with our leadership to figure out, again, like who we needed to ask for buy-in for this project. Then we were fortunate in that we have someone on our facilities team who's has already been using drone flights as a tool for collecting data on a number of different projects and information, getting aerial photography, etc. So we already kind of had the infrastructure in place to request a flight that specifically was focused on lighting. And that gave us a lot of really interesting information that was really looking at things from a bird's eye perspective. So it's one thing to walk around at night and be able to point these things out, versus being able to get that flyover and really quickly be able to see what the most problematic areas would be and how we would kind of prioritize the different areas. So once we did the flyover, we actually, to make sure we were interpreting the information accurately, we were able to basically watch the flyover with a researcher, Brent Seymour, who has done some presentations to this group before. He's since left the university, unfortunately, but he was really helpful in helping us understand what we were seeing. As far as like where we have different levers of influence, having researchers that are part of the institution goes a long way when we're making the case. So with his support, we identified what those problem areas were. We figured out kind of the top tier ones that we wanted to tackle. And we went about trying to figure out who was in charge of those different areas. We needed to ask permission at the highest level to figure out, like particularly we wanted to have Brookings Hall, which is was actually in like that lead photo that I had here. So have Brookings Hall go dark, because that would be like a very kind of like the arch going dark. We thought that would be a very influential building. And we wanted to make sure everyone was aware that was going to happen. Another thing we needed to navigate was that the first season that we were pitching was spring, and that coincides with WashU's commencement. And we have a lot of all the families of graduates on campus, a lot of donors and alumni. So it's a kind of a high profile, sensitive time for having campus look like literally the best. Landscaping's really like rolling out the red carpet, and everything has to look perfect. So having changes in the lighting, we didn't want to shock anyone with that either, and wanted to make sure we had buy-in. And then finally, I'll talk about our outreach campaign, which was guided by Lights Out Heartland. And then we did a process of collecting feedback to see how people felt the impact. And then we adjusted and repeated. So I'm going to share, so I have a couple of slides, more than a couple of slides, a handful of slides that kind of show what we were seeing, and I think can be informative to the group. So I'll just kind of go through and talk about some of the ones that we thought were the biggest priority. So when Brett saw this blue light, he like immediately said, you know, we need to get that to go away, because apparently the blue spectrum is kind of the worst for circadian rhythms, and not just for non-human animals, but for humans as well. And he explained that, you know, particularly if you're having, you know, the student body that's walking around on campus and going into residential spaces, and their brains are already messed up with all the screens and everything, but trying to eliminate this blue light whenever possible. When we talked to the building operator here, we learned that this was a relatively new sign that was installed for the theater on campus, but there were different lighting controls. So the beauty of LEDs is tends to be built-in flexibility. And so we were able to encourage some alternative lights, lighting colors. And then we also were able to work with them to only have this lighting go on during show nights, during the migration season. So we felt like that was a nice win. And once we were able to kind of explain the context and everything, people got on board relatively easily. We saw not too many, but a fair amount of uplight. And this was one that was particularly problematic and glaring. When we figured out what we were looking at, we learned that this was an American flag that was on the top of a probably like a 3 or 4 story, maybe even higher building, and then like big post higher above that. This is one of 2 areas where we have American flags on campus. The other was that Brookings building that I had mentioned that was kind of the iconic lighting facade that we were most interested in turning off. And what we learned was, I did not know that it is Missouri law that you must illuminate a flag if it's flying, an American flag, or you can bring it down. And I think many, or if not most, approaches to lighting flags is kind of this uplight fixture. So in addition to that, these flags are very high up, so it's like logistically challenging for and truly impractical for someone to go and take down the flag on a nightly basis. And where we landed with this is we wanted to have maybe like a longer term recommendation to install some uplit or no, I guess like downlit. So install it at the top of the flag, lighting down, which I guess is less common, but would still be quite expensive because we would need to bring a crane in to do that sort of adjustment. So yeah, we flag this as a longer term something to tackle. And then we had a couple of areas like this where we were able to just kind of hone in on where this is mainly decorative facade lighting. The image on the left is I think on each corner of the campus, we have a low wall that says Washington University in St. Louis, and it has the uplights. And we did get buy-in to turn off this type of lighting, and didn't get much pushback for that, as long as it was temporary. This one is a very cool art piece that is in the center of campus that is kind of it's very dynamic. It moves in the wind. It reacts to the light. It makes all these nice reflections, but it is definitely bright. One thing that we learned is it might not be super bad for birds in that it's intermittent light, so it's changing. It's not like a one beam that's being steadily cast up. But it's certainly not ideal for the lights at time period. So this was one that we also got approval to turn off. We also saw a fair amount of light pollution that was coming from inside buildings. So this one in particular is the greenhouse on campus. And when we talked to them, we learned that they had just recently changed all their bulbs for an energy efficiency project. But it was to this very bright white light. And this was one area that we didn't really see a great alternative because of the types of research that was happening and the just kind of the structure of the application of this building. So this was challenging. And then here's just again like another handful of buildings that had some uplights that were decorative and we could turn off. The top left one is we have a fair number of skylights on campus, which is great for bringing natural light in, but it does cause some light pollution. We are encouraging different automations and lowering of the lights in these areas where possible. A lot of these spaces are activated. Like this is an art building, for example, and students are often in that building until midnight and sometimes beyond. So they do tend to have highlighting needs that do pose some of these challenges. Here are just kind of more examples of that light pollution coming out. The building on the right here is a all glass building, and the nice thing about this building and the building across from it actually is that they have pretty high-tech lighting controls, and the campus architect at the time kind of wanted these to be very visible glass boxes. We have a new campus architect in place who is definitely, I think, more open to downplaying glass in general, and not utilizing it as a central part of the structure going forward in new buildings. But this one we were able to program to reduce the lighting, and we didn't get any negative pushback. And so this one we actually got to keep permanent with the I think it's like maybe a 10% lighting when the building's unoccupied in the evenings. This is that Brookings facade that I mentioned. All things considered, the light pollution isn't terrible. There's not a lot that's getting beyond the building, but it was one where the flag and the facade is all in the same circuit. So without some pretty intricate changes to the lighting setup, we weren't really able to do what we wanted with this building. And in this one, you can see the building with a lot of windows. I don't recall what time this video was taken, but I think it was maybe around like 7 o'clock at night in the winter. So still, very active times on campus. But we did recommend that occupants close the blinds. And so we did put out communications to the custodial teams and the occupants of buildings to encourage them to close their blinds during this time period and turn off lights. This is just another atrium, as I mentioned. And then this is an area that's all a new development, so it's highly unlikely at this point that we switch out our lighting. The bulbs are, or the fixtures are intended to look historic and to match the others on campus, but they only have about like maybe a 2/3 cap, not a full cap. So better than nothing, but not ideal. And this was one of those, like, we weren't gonna make a lot of progress on this because it's only a 3-year-old installation and they would not be changing it dramatically anytime soon. But we at least started the conversations to see if there might be some retrofits that we could do that would help the uplit issue. And then we also recognize some areas that are pretty darn good for what they are. So here's an example of a surface level garage, so this is actually a rooftop garage, and there's very even light. It's warmer from a safety perspective, which is really important. It's still visible, but there's nothing shining, brightly up. And then on the right is a courtyard, kind of similarly lit, but nothing glaringly pointing upward. Here's another parking lot. And here's the tennis court. This one is one where it's like, there's someone playing tennis. Why do we need all those lights? So this is an interesting one to kind of bring up and try to figure out who's controlling this space. And is there anything that we can do to just turn off the lights when there aren't people playing on the courts? And whether that's some sort of occupancy timing, something that people are pushing and it turns off at a certain time, or something like that. So we actually have not made progress on this, but at least we're kind of aware of it as an issue. And this one is a little confusing. It's a new pedestrian and bike path that goes over the Forest Park Parkway. So students use this a lot. They definitely want it to be well lit. All of this is downlit and it's underneath the railing, but it definitely has a glow to it. So we weren't quite sure what to make of this space, but it highlighted that we might need to work with the aperture settings or the automation on the drone itself so that it's not adjusting to show more light when truly there isn't that much of an issue. So we've requested another flyover this season, and we want to play with the settings to see if we can get something that's a little bit more consistent and gives us an even better read. So from the flyover and talking with we did talk with some folks from this group to get their input, as well as Brett. And some of the things that we've asked as we are doing this analysis is, are these lights needed at all? Or are there some that we could just not turn back on? And there were not a ton, but there are certainly some that they didn't bother switching the switch back on. The flags were highlighted as something that was really challenging and might need to be a longer term something that we return to. We are interested for the facade lighting, and someone brought up that we could do custom filters that would further restrict the light, so it's really only hitting the building and nothing is happening to get beyond the building. And we've talked about potentially allocating some like longer term funds to take a look at particularly our bookings hall. Let's see, we talked again about turning off lights, closing blinds, and putting on occupancy sensors to try to reduce the light that's coming out of buildings, avoid that blue light. And then we started to have some conversations about safety. So we did talk to our police department about that we were going to do this project, and we wanted to make sure that they were aware. And we also wanted to get feedback from them if they felt like there were certain areas that were too dark on campus, and kind of work with them through any issues that came up. And then again, there might be like a handful of fixtures that we might seek modifications for in the future. Then I mentioned earlier that we did an outreach campaign, which is a big push from the Lights Out Heartland group. So we did put out materials about that kind of coupled the information about lights out, as well as bird collisions with glass. That has been something that we've heard concern about from a lot of different communities on campus. So we have several student groups that have brought this up. We've built it into one of the classes focused on doing a study of bird strikes at dusk and dawn, and was able to give us really good data about which glass areas are most problematic on campus. And then we also have a group of faculty on the medical school campus that has been doing a similar tracking of bird strikes, and they've been very vocal in trying to encourage remediation for glass that's problematic, and also start this conversation around lights out at the med school campus. And then as far as sustaining the communication, on the right is a snippet from our monthly newsletter. And so we add in a little reminder communication about the project. We make any updates to the website and kind of recycle this content. And we also do some messaging on our social media. And then we do like direct emails to those building operators and custodial partners as well, to remind them to spread the word to folks who could also impact the interior light situation. So, after, again, these 4 migration seasons, we certainly have had some successes. As, again, some of these changes were made permanent. We have had some leadership change, which you never know what's going to happen. So it could be that someone comes in and says, why are the lights out on the sculptures? We absolutely need to get those back. We haven't had that kind of pushback yet. We do have a new campus architect, which I mentioned, and we do need to do some targeted education with him. He comes from Arizona, so different regional context. And we want to make sure that he's aware of this project and can potentially help advance some of the concerns that we've been addressing. We have confirmed that we do have design guidelines that, so we have LEED certification requirements for all new buildings, which typically includes outdoor lighting guidance as well. And we have some opportunities coming up in the future where we know more development will happen and we can potentially influence what kind of lighting goes in place in those areas. And those guidelines include the specific lighting fixtures as well as the lighting warmth. But then there are certainly areas of improvement as well. So one thing that we kind of realized a little bit too late this year was that the communication didn't really go out to the people who need to flip the switches. So the switches were not flipped, and we had more lights on than we typically would. So that was a miss on our part. But we've since that conversation figured out some ways to just put reminders in well in advance so that they pop up and we don't need quite as much hand holding for those changes to happen. And then we also are starting to put together a plan for appealing for funds for those larger capital projects to have some resources available to hopefully address some of the higher target areas that we recognize through the flyovers that are impacting light pollution. So that is all I have.
Well, thanks, Cassie. That's great. I'm kind of curious. Sometimes we're getting a lot of pushback on safety. What was the police's reaction to this when you started talking about actually turning off or down lights as opposed to making it brighter?
Yeah, so I felt like our team, our police department was pretty open to it. The nice thing is that the way our campus is structured is we already have a pretty good campus as far as lighting goes. So it wasn't like we had to make dramatic changes in many cases. And if there was lighting that was seen as related to security, we pretty much didn't touch it. So the parking lots, for example, we felt like they were required for safety, but also like pretty darn well done for what they were. So we didn't really have to do that type of changes. So at the end of the day, they didn't come back to us with any concerns. They appreciated being informed at the front end, but we didn't hear anything from them about, little corners or cavities that just felt too dark. Okay. So I think the big one that we did get someone to reach out to us was from the person who manages the outdoor sculptures. And, I guess they didn't get the original communication and wanted to know why the lights were broken. So I think they were fine once we, again, shared the information.
So we have some listeners here. If you guys have questions, drop them in the chat there or the comments area. So I know we talked a little bit before we got started today. The challenge with this is to have an initial, okay, let's get really into it, but then the sustainability question. So it sounds like you're putting things in writing, you're building multiple individuals into the teams to make it actually last. Is that correct?
That's what we're trying. So, even a basic Outlook reminder that is scheduled now and not when everyone's really busy around that commencement time when we need to start turning lights off. So it's in everyone's calendars. So that helped. The person who's in charge of literally switching the circuit breakers, it was a bigger lift the first season because they had to actually do some electrical work to kind of rearrange the circuits or pull it so that one thing could be turned off and something else could be left on. So I think after that lift, it was easier and they had a better idea of which circuits needed to be flipped. So I haven't seen that documentation, but I'm told it exists with the people who need to know it, and it has made it relatively more straightforward. I'm told it takes about 2 weeks for them to kind of make the rounds to do all that switch flipping. So they definitely do need a bit of a heads up. But we did get approval when we did this originally to kind of go based on whatever the guidelines were. And so we have tried to extend the period so that it aligns with the full migration, which also gives us a little bit of padding in case everything's not all switched off at the beginning.
What about students? Are students getting involved in this? Because obviously it's as much about getting the lights out as also spreading the word and getting others to get engaged. So students would seem to be a very good target, right? I mean, to get excited about this, because you can do it mechanically, but then you say, wow, if I get students really excited and enthused about this, it'll actually spread. Is that right?
Yeah, I think students have actually been a lot more drawn to the glass call to action.
Oh
So
yeah. Yeah.
understanding, so being able to educate around linking those two and how they're related, and trying to simplify messaging. Because I know I personally had trouble kind of articulating how it's connected. And so yeah, being able to broaden their awareness to include, if you're concerned about this, you should also be concerned about this. And this is something, it's a lot easier for an institution with pretty stagnant infrastructure to, it's a lot easier to turn off lights than it is to spend $30,000 on retrofitting glass.
All right.
So
Okay.
so yeah, it's been broadening the conversation.
So we have one of our listeners has a question. For those electrical changes, was there a cost for that work, and did you cover it in some way?
So I didn't get a bill, and the university is pretty diligent about billing out for labor and time, and like, we charge you and you charge us, and we, push the money around. But so it must have been, I guess, because we got the approval from the the chief administrative officer, I think is the title, who's essentially who facilities reports to. I think because we got the approval at that level, that they just kind of made it happen and didn't bill us for the time that it took for the electricians to go around and flip the switches. And so there's a certain amount of that labor that I think is just kind of wrapped into the operations, and for whatever reason they didn't feel it was important to relay that information back to me or send it to me in a bill. So yeah, so this time we got away with it.
So have you made contact with any other universities to share your knowledge? That's one of our listeners is asking.
Yeah, so we're connected through the higher education, St. Louis Higher Education Sustainability Coalition, I think is the name of it. But so it's other people like me at other institutions across St. Louis, and also we have some in Illinois and some in Missouri. And so we did a presentation similar to this to let folks know that we were participating in it and how we approach the challenge. And I'm actually not entirely sure if anyone has moved forward with it. So that's a good reminder to follow up with them again.
Well, I do know that there, and we'll need to break here in just a moment, but I do know that the American Astronomical Society is putting together a university type of thing on lights for university, lights out for universities. It's called Shine, I think. So we'll talk about that. We're going to have a partner meeting in just a moment. We'll be breaking here from our presentation, but I don't see any more questions. So I think we're going to go ahead and take a break here, and then our partners stay on here. We have our normal regular meeting, but Cassie, what a great presentation. I love what you've been doing. It was such a big thing to tackle. I can't imagine how you actually did this. Like, wow, moving this whole thing forward is such a big deal. So anyway, that's great. So for those of you that are listening on Facebook, we recorded this, and I will post this. If you go to our Lights Out Heartland webpage, there'll be a place there where you can actually click a link to the video. And we had one last month on window treatments, by the way. So we've already got one out there, and we'll add Cassie's out there, and probably tomorrow sometime. So thank you, Cassie, and stay online here. And thanks everyone for joining us. And we'll be back in January. Lights Out Colorado is with us actually today as our partner meeting. We'll be talking about what they've been doing in Colorado to get their lights turned off for safe birds. So watch on Facebook if you're there, and you'll be able to see that program coming up. And we look forward to connecting again.